Hello, this is Chris Ott, and this is part 18 of this series, What Meher Baba Really Taught. And in this part, I'm going to talk about what I mean by the phrase, the evolution of perception. I'm going to talk about it in some detail, hopefully, here. It's the name of both of my short books. The first one is The Evolution of Perception, and the second one, The Evolution of Perception Re-Explained. And I can link to both of them in the show notes. But what I wanted to talk about is I wanted to say exactly what I mean by those words and how this idea complements and Meher Baba's teaching and actually augments understanding of what he's describing. So there's a certain amount of interpretation by me, so someone could challenge that. But I think as he understands what I'm saying, he'll find, and he understands Baba more, he'll see that this is true, that this is an augmentation of his idea, and not a contradiction to it at all. But it's something that brings clarity. So, first of all, people sometimes think I'm referring to what Baba refers to as the evolution of consciousness. Now, the evolution of consciousness is a major theme in Baba's teaching in cosmology. It's what drives evolution. It's the sort of the impetus to gain consciousness. And this is a chapter in his major book, God Speaks, The Evolution of Consciousness. However, the full name of that chapter, which is chapter 8 and the longest and hardest to read chapter of the book, is the beyond state of God, the first urge, and the cycle of evolution and involution of consciousness. But then once the chapter starts, the headings just say evolution of consciousness, for short. But really, it's a much part of a bigger theme. And as I was looking for his use of the phrase evolution of consciousness, I came upon a sentence. Often in this book, paragraphs are sentences. They're such long sentences, they're paragraph long. This is one of those. And you can read it. It's on page, the chapter begins on page 81, and this is page 88. The first time he uses the phrase evolution of consciousness. If you don't understand it right now, you would if you took the book and read it slowly and carefully. Thus, the evolution of consciousness goes on evolving further and greater consciousness during evolution, in conformity with the evolution of gross forms of relatively higher and higher types, in order to experience the impressions gathered in conjunction with the preceding relatively lower types of gross media, meaning the previous experiences in evolution that the soul has gathered impressions of. So the evolution is both prompted by the desire for consciousness, and the desire for consciousness is also the byproduct of the evolution. Or really, no, he actually says that the forms of the byproduct and the real product is the consciousness. That's what evolution is really for. So what we see in nature is really the byproduct of that process, that evolution. So there's a kind of a primary evolution and a secondary phenomenal one that we see, which is the relic of the first, or byproduct of the first. And he actually, byproduct is a term from factories, and God Speaks was written in 1953, 54, so a lot of factories. But he uses, he actually says, a byproduct in the factory of consciousness. So anyway, but that's not what I'm talking about, although that is part of what I describe when in my books I talk about the evolution of perception. Because perception requires consciousness. But I want to make a difference between what I mean and how the perception could evolve, because that's a kind of an odd thought. People have no idea what the title means. As a matter of fact, the full title of my first little book, which is only 80 pages, was The Evolution of Perception and the Cosmology of Substance. And what I meant is that substance, what we call substance, materials that are hard and that have in the regular colloquial sense, substantiveness in our experience, that evolves from a slow process of evolving perception. So that's what I mean by the evolution of perception and the cosmology of substance. In a sense, the cosmology of substance is explained by the evolution of perception. And cosmology means formation. So the formation of substance like this is the byproduct of an evolution of perception, which is intermingled with this consciousness subject. But I got to separate them so that you can see what I'm talking about, and that I'm not just repeating what Baba said, but although I'm totally being consistent with it. When I gave a talk about my second book, somebody raised their hand and said, what you mean is evolution of consciousness. Well, he's just getting that because Baba used the phrase, but that's not what I mean. That's not what I mean. I mean something that is different and bigger. And it's what Baba is describing overall. Now, in order to talk about this, I need to define words. I do this often because in analytic philosophy, the criticism is that you sound profound because you're being vague about the meaning of your words. And if you really were precise, you could see mistakes and so forth. So I'm always precise. I'm always I always clarify exactly what I mean, so there can't be any ambiguity at all, because I don't want to be accused of having ambiguous, language, which is sort of what they call, New Age mumbo jumbo, because it's not clear what you're talking about, So it's easy to sound deep when you're not clear, but I try to be very clear. And I think this is deep, but it's deep and clear. Okay, so first of all, evolution. Let's talk about evolution a moment. I've given some talks, and I've written even more outside of those talks, on the subject of causes. So why have I done that? It's very important. When we talk about something being caused, we usually are kind of a little vague in what we mean. There's many senses in which the cause of something can be defined as. For instance, the cause of something could be what, if I have an object that's made in a factory, then the cause could be the factory, the work that they did, the engineers and so forth that designed this, and then the people that, made the molds and they poured the molds and all that. That could be the cause of this. Or the cause could be, that's called an efficient cause. And there's another cause, Aristotle came up with these distinctions. Another one is called the material cause. So we say, well, the cause of this is plastic, and then you might look into, what are the materials in that plastic? So that's another sense of its cause. And then there's also the cause can be the intention. Like, what's it for? Why was it made? That, you could say, is the cause of this. So this is to hold media for cameras. So you could say, well, that's the real cause. This is why this was made, in order to hold media for cameras. So you see these different senses. It's not a simple thing. Also, when I describe the cause of something, I say, well, the cause is that Joe Schmo, he designed this in order to code media. But then you have to go further back into what caused him to want to make a holder for media, or what caused cameras to be invented that hold media. And then you have to go back to, earlier. So we have another concept of cause, which is the first cause. And then there's even I've already covered that. The final cause is its intention, so which is this product here. So now, what I want to emphasize is that the closest sense of cause, the strongest sense of cause of a thing, is how it came into this world, the world that we perceive. Or you could say, it's cosmology. It's how did it get here? That's its explanation, which is very related to cause. When I want to know the cause of something, I want it explained how it arrived in the world. What is the cause of this object? Now, in modern science has moved toward a new way of explaining things in terms of, in the past they explained things in terms of gods, and then they explained things in terms of sort of made up occult entities and so forth. But in modern times, scientists have more and more speculate about a process of evolution that produced that object, or that condition. So we have plate tectonics as the motion of the continents and taking the position that they now have over millions of years. Well, what is the process that brought about the current shape of the continents? And this is called plate tectonics. And it was only developed seriously in the 70s when they had the equipment to be able to take sonar of the bottom of the ocean and see where the spreading was of the continental plates and so forth. And so the current condition of the map of the Earth is the effect of an ancient and ongoing evolutionary process of lava forming into land masses and subduction and so forth. And it's all very interesting. And it's interesting because one of the first examples where we explained something in terms of an evolutionary process was biological evolution, of course, which wasn't really that long ago. It was Darwin's Origin of the Species, where he's trying to explain our species. The species is our species. The origin of our species, or the explanation of us, or the cause of us and the condition that we're in. He believed also, like plate tectonics, but 100 years earlier, the result of a ongoing, ancient and always ongoing evolutionary process of forms. And then he gave a mechanics by which that would happen. Similar or analogous to the plate tectonics I just described, he has a mechanics for that. And we didn't really have theories like that prior to Darwin's book. Prior to that, we had occult entities. We had things like, if you wanted to know why a person was sick, you look for the humors and then you tried to remove or adjust them or balance them and so forth. There were occult things you couldn't see. So whether it was spirits or gods or animal spirits or all kinds of things in ancient medicine. In modern medicine, we're looking for processes. Our organ systems of our body were not very well understood not that long ago. Today there are, and so that we're better able to understand why we have the symptoms that we do and the conditions that we do, and we're better able to try to cure them. Okay, so and evolution is the best way to truly account for how a condition got to be the way it is now from when it wasn't. And that's enough on that for the moment. I'd like to come back to that, maybe even in another video, and talk more about how we analyze processes. But for now, I'm going to just go forward with the next topic, which is perception. So if that's evolution, remember, I'm describing what I mean by the evolution of perception. And then perception, what do we mean by perception? Well, this is a big subject. It would seem like it's not a big subject. But perception is a word that goes way back, I think, to the Latin. It means percipere, and it meant to gather. And by extension, it came to mean to gather any kind of experience that you have. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be through the senses. It could be a headache, or it could be a thought originally. But in the late 1700s, it became narrowed to just mean perception means through the five senses of physical things. But originally, when I use the word perception, I'm using it in its broadest sense, its original classic sense from the Latin, which means to take experience of. Okay, that's all I mean. That I perceive, I take experience of that, and I could take experience of a fantasy. It doesn't have to be through my five senses, because if I experience it, I perceive it in the classical sense of the word perception. This confused some people when my book came out, although people who were more used to modern philosophy from the 1700s, 1600s, totally, they knew what I meant. But people who hadn't and just looked it up in the dictionary on your computer, that it says, with the senses, like sensation essentially means. So what you put together with your sensations of the data from your five senses. And then, so there is a really great word in the English language, and it's the word see. So when I say what I mean by perceive, I mean anything that you see. But when I say see isn't like perception, where they narrowed the meaning of it. See has all its original broad meanings. So like, I see that we're not going to come to an agreement. I see what how that concept works. But it also can mean any of the five senses. We take experience, so we see. Oh, I see. Oh, I see that. Now, it seems strange to hear sound and go, I see, but that's how I mean it. I mean in its broadest sense of anything that you see. Now, to see something, to see the meaning of a concept or a dream or a physical object in the room, it requires being conscious. One cannot see without being conscious. Now, there's this talk these days about AI, artificial intelligence. And the notion is that, computers are going to become conscious. And this is an old idea that was in 2001. It's been around. But the problem with it is that while it looks like a computer can think, and I want to talk about what thinking is often in our own brain, okay? It doesn't see. So let's take an example that's actually used in philosophy of mind. Some people say that a thermostat, the thing that measures the temperature and turns the heat on and off on your wall, perceives, because it follows the definition of perceive. If you define perceiving as taking an input and then reacting to the input, which is a behaviorist definition of perception. The thing is, that's true. A thermostat will kick on the heat if the temperature drops below a certain point, and it'll kick it off when it gets up to a certain point. So it seems like it perceives the temperature. But if you want to define perception in that strange way, then that's fine. but it doesn't see what the temperature is. It doesn't really see what it's detecting. It doesn't feel the warmth or the coldness. That's something that a conscious thing does, like a person or an animal even. Even plants, to a large extent, can see that the sun is out and that they move in that direction. They do react. It looks kind of like a thermostat, but there's a difference that we all intuitively know what it is. And if you want to deny it and say that you don't perceive, that you're like a thermostat, that's called gaslighting, and you can go look it up. You're not really being straight. Even to say I don't perceive requires you being seeing that you don't perceive. so it's a contradiction. It's self-contradiction. So it's bullshit. Okay. And there's actual method to that kind of bullshit, and it's in the contemporary analytic philosophy, and it's in a book with an introduction by Bertrand Russell, and it's called Words and Things, and anybody can look that up, and it'll talk about this, where people are not genuine. That's part of their technique, is to kind of win an argument by gaslighting, but or appear to with a untrained student, for instance. Okay, so that's what I mean by perception. Perception, I mean to see, seeing. Okay, but isn't the so now? Okay, let's hold on a second. Let me think. Okay, there's two things. There's the verb to see, to perceive, okay, to take experience of, the verb, the action, something that we appear to do, or it's an event, I'm perceiving, I've got a headache, I really feel the headache, I'm perceiving that this pain that I have. That's a verb. But there's also, and the word perception can be used this way, but not the word see. The word see is always a verb. And that is the sense in which, what is your perception? So that's talking about the object of your experience, the headache, okay? So I perceive a couch over there. So there's the act of perceiving, and then there's the perception that I'm alluding to, which is the couch. So there's the act, and there's its object, okay? And then I, the perceiver, am the subject. Subject, act, object. I perceive the couch. Now, when I'm talking, I'm always talking about the verb. When I talk about the evolution of perception, I'm talking about the evolution of perception as the change over time of how perception occurs, the mode of perceiving. Okay. Now, it's this evolution of modes of perceiving that created the world. So it's not an evolution of the objects. That's what they describe in biology, when they talk about Darwinian evolution, for instance. They're describing an evolution from this form, to this form, a whale, say. And then that's the object. But I'm describing the evolution of the act, the mode in which it's done. Done by who? Well, we're going to get into that. So that's kind of critical. But, so that should all be clear. Now, I want to point out one other thing. One of the problems with the word conscious, because whenever I talk about my sense of the word perceive, I essentially mean the taking experience of anything I can be conscious of taking the experience of. But the problem with the word consciousness is that it doesn't have a verb form. So I know this is kind of complicated, but I wanted to mention it. The word, I can't say I conscious that couch. So I say I perceive that couch. But inherent in my saying that I perceive it it's implied that I have to be conscious of the couch that I'm perceiving. Or I don't really perceive it. I don't really see it. Only in the sense of a thermostat, which isn't really perception at all. That's just a gaslighting definition to defend behaviorism, which is a kind of a kook crank idea. I'll tell you what behaviorism is. Behaviorism is the opposite of everything I'm talking about. I had a professor who was a behaviorist, and he said, a dead body, a corpse, if you take its lips and you turn them up, it's happy because it's smiling. And that's what we mean by happiness. That's how unbelievably out of touch they are. So that's a kind of gaslighting. Now, how can the act of perception evolve? Well, this requires a concept, which actually I realized later came from Baba's teaching, his teaching about the sanskara, which is described in the discourses. There's quite a bit of material in chapters on the sanskara, the creation of sanskaras, the formation of sanskaras, and the eventual getting rid of sanskaras. But sanskaras are kind of like lenses, I always say. They color or condition what you see based on what you've seen in the past. And actually in psychology, there's a word for that, and it's called apperception. If I'm a little child and I watch a building burn and people die in the future, I see fire, I become afraid because I apperceive the phenomena of the fire through the lens conditioning of that prior experience, whether I remember the experience or not, because it has left an impression on my mind. It has conditioned my mind. And that piece of that impression, Baba calls a sanskara. And literally in Sanskrit, the word sanskara means impression. And this is kind of like you leave an impression in wax, when you press a ring into hot wax. But we don't mean it physically, we mean it psychologically. It leaves a psychological, in a sense, scar, which is kind of interesting because they're called sanskaras. But that's not a real argument or anything, it's just something I always noticed. It's kind of like the scars left on your mind by all your past experience color all your future experience. So in my both of my books, I call the sanskaras, I give it a more technical name, which is these are perceptual schemas. So every time, a schema is a way of organizing. And every time you have an experience, it organizes how you will experience similar situations in the future. So it's organizing the act of perceiving in a new way. This is why people, argue, because they are seeing through different sanskaras. So let's take a poor child and a rich child, and they're walking along a path, and they come upon a $5 bill. And the poor child, who's grown up in a family where they don't always have $5, he goes, "Oh, wow, that's a lot of money." And the rich girl says, "Oh, you silly girl, that's hardly any money at all." So what's the difference? Well, it's the past experiences and conditioning of the rich girl compared to the past experience and conditioning of the poor girl. So that's an example of apperception, perceiving through the conditioning of your past. Now, not all sanskaras are simply caused that way. There are original... Okay, let me get into this. When I say that the world is... So, by the way, this story of the little girls walking along is an example of people and the way their experience evolves, okay, in their lifetime. But when I say the world is the result, of all the planets and, the suns and all, how could they have been caused by an evolution of perception? Whose perception? Okay, that's where a lot of the things that I've been talking about come into play. Remember from my last video, number 17, there is this benevolent infinite intelligence which which existed before the world, but was latent, or in a sense, in a sleep state. And because Baba's description of cosmology is entirely psychogenic. Psychogenic means having a psychological origin, not a physical origin. The physical is actually the effect, or what we see and call physical is the effect of evolution of perception. Okay, so the original sanskaras that were formed and colored and changed perception were in that original single intelligence prior to all the apparent individual ones where we feel separate. That separateness that we experience, we actually are that infinite intelligence. We all are, but we experience ourselves as separate because of the sanskaras that have created that. But if you go back before that to the beginning of time and the beginning of creation, there's just this one perceiver. And there still is, but it was still sort of untarnished by all these individual sanskaras. I'm not sure if I said that right, but let me go on. So it begins to evolve ways of perceiving, and this includes time and space and natural laws. And natural laws are simply ratios of time and space. But these evolved before there were things to see that way. Okay, there wasn't any phenomena to perceive in accordance with the natural laws when the natural laws were evolving in the imagination of the infinite intelligence originally. And so, but the things that it saw actually evolved out of the natural laws. So as these laws form, they begin to form a world, which is originally a mathematical world. And then as you evolve eyes and ears and the sense organs and a brain and neural system, you are able to translate certain mathematical states into colors, certain colors, red, blue, green, others into sounds, this pitch, that volume. And a world begins to emerge. Now, where do we find this in Baba's teaching? It's very brief, okay? But it's more in infinite intelligence, though. But it's very brief, and it is the phrase when he's describing the original whim of God to know himself. There was the first sanskara, and the first sanskara was that desire to know himself, by the way, which is a way of shaping how he's looking. He's now looking for himself, okay, rather than just sort of like peering sort of passively. And what was I going to say? Baba says in God Speaks, at this point where he talks about the whim, which he says is the cause of everything, the whim of God, or the whim of that original infinite intelligence to know itself, is that the world appeared and went on expanding. The very most finite piece of the world, or the first atom, it appeared and that world went on expanding. Now, when you say, he didn't say the world got created and went on expanding. He said it appeared. And the word appears means is perceived. The world began to be perceived by who? By the infinite intelligence, by God, okay? And so this isn't a very radical idea from a Western standpoint. As I've said several times, George Berkeley had this idea that the world is simply ideas in the mind of God. And what he meant is sensible qualities like color and sound. It's the phenomenal experience of a world is the world. That's what Berkeley speculated. And I think my thesis was on Berkeley, and that had a big influence on me. That the possibility that there is no second world that you don't perceive, that you're somehow getting a mirror image of, or some kind of shadow or projection of. The world that you perceive is the world. And Baba never says anything to contradict that. It's an illusion, which is consistent with God essentially dreaming up the world through these sanskars. All right, that's all I'm going to say for now. That's what I meant by the evolution of perception. And I'll think about this, and I'll watch this, and if I can clarify things better, I'll do a second part or do one later on. But I wanted to talk about that, what I mean by these words. Okay, thank you very much, and I'll see you in part 19 when I get to it. Thank you. Bye-bye.